So we're going to talk today about machine matzah, but we need a few introductions to the topic before we start. So first of all, introduction number one, and I think this is the most important introduction, is that this is a little different than some of the other controversies that we've talked about. In this way, as follows. A lot of the other controversies have been small-time people who tried to make innovations and were met with resistance by the Gedolei Hadar, who spoke strongly against them, and we know how that shakes out. What's unique about this machlokes is that on both sides is truly Gedolei Hadar, the biggest of the big, and the fight became extremely heated, and they spoke very passionately and personally about each other. And as we're going to read the tshuvas and read their own words, that's the first takdama to keep in mind, is that the people on both sides that we're talking about are mamish, the Gedolei Hadar of the generation. Okay, so as follows. Originally, the Yemei Chazal, the way matzah was baked, was in every person's personal home before the Suda. A person and his wife would get together and they'd bake bread. They'd have matzah for the Suda like that. The Gemara in Psachim and Avkuf Tesvav and Beis brings a drasha that says lechem oini. So the Gemara has a few interpretations of what the drasha of lechem oini is, and the third one of them is ma ani ishte mishager v'hu oife af matzah ishte mishager v'hu oife, which means ma ani, who cannot afford to buy bread from a different baker and can't afford to have a staff on hand, so he's busy stoking the flames of the fire and his wife is baking. So too matzah should be done in that manner, where the ani is stoking, the individual is stoking the flames of the fire and his wife is baking. So it implies to us clearly that the baking that was done, the Yemei Chazal, the matzah that was baked, was not an industrial matzah bakery that was pumping out matzah for many people. Every family on their own would bake their little matzahs at home, and that might be better or worse than a bakery, but that's how it was done. For better or for worse, that's how it was done. Now, the Rashbam, Afenar in the Gemara says that the reason why ani mishager v'ishta was because you needed the fire to be intensely hot, like we know about matzah. If the fire is not intensely hot, it could come to be chametz. So the ani had to be focused and keep stoking the flames to make sure it's intensely hot. That's how the Rashbam learns it. So he learns it was a technical, practical matter that you needed to have all these contributors, all the participation in getting the matzah baked over there. Other Rishonim learn that the reason is because the person is supposed to involve himself in afiyas matzah. And from there, the Rosh, who is much later on, says even if one could bake in a bakery with helpers, you, the person, should stand on top of them and instruct them and make sure that you're involved in it. Out this din of ani oife of ani mishager v'ishte oife. So what we see from the Rosh is that already in the Rosh's time, matzah had moved out of the home kitchen and already had come to some sort of structured, organized matzah bakery situation. And the Rosh is saying, Afal Pikein, take the din from the Zman of the Gemara and apply it somehow to our times. So we have, just to chart the course, Bizman Chazal, matzah was done heimish gebacht at home, everyone made it themselves. And by the time of the Rishonim, Kufas Rishonim, we start seeing different innovations, different gzeiros, different rules to aid with the halachas of matzah baking, which implies to us clearly that matzah baking was done in a more organized fashion in a bakery. If anyone's been to matzah bakery, that big bar that they use to knead it with, to make it easier, that's an invention that the Meiri discusses. Meiri is about 850 years ago. The Meiri discusses the invention of the bar and what to make it out of, how to use it. So that we already start seeing the matzah bakery environment being created around that tkufa. So now, that's facts and just how it developed. Now, let's talk about the issues that could arise in a matzah bakery. So there's many Gemaras, and each one links to another different din, and a lot of them will be relevant to the back and forth of the different poskim over here, where they would discuss machine matzah. So let me just share a few of them, just so we have some of the relevant information on the table in front of us as we go through the talk about it. Just for example, there's a din everyone knows, matzah needs mayim shalanu. Mayim shalanu means we draw water the night before from a be'er, you let it sit in a container, a sealed container, and use it the next day. What's the reason for that? So it's in Mefurish Gemara. Rashi explains, Shehamayonis b'mei Nisan hem chamin. Well water during the tkuf of Nisan are warm, they're hot. And and Therefore, Chazal asked you to use them, to be lush matzah with them right away. Take if mishiyitzim and aretz to have a likein mayim chamim. It's like hot water, and hot water is not allowed to be used. For example, so you see one din that temperature control is very important. We're looking for temperature control in every ingredient that's going into the bowl. We don't want anything too hot, because too hot alters the metrics of when something turns chametz. Another example is there's a shear. The din is that you're not allowed to be oif matzah, akapanim medina de Gemara. One cannot be oif matzah in a batch that's bigger than the shear of challah. The shear that's required to be mafresh challah on is 43.5 bayim, which is give or take 5 pounds, let's say, in today's amounts. And the din, the Gemara says, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins like that, you can't make a batch of matzah that's bigger than the shear challah. What's the reason? The reason is because the time frame that Chazal described for us, that they said that something doesn't become chametz for a certain amount of time, they described to us the time frame of an average size batch. An average size batch is a batch that's sheer challah, not bigger than that. Bigger than that, all bets are off. We don't know. Maybe it gets chametz quicker or slower. Maybe it's too hard to knead it properly. Maybe you're not allowed to. Now, incidentally, the Mishnah Berurah brings down, and many poskim say this from the Beis Yosef, that was all true in the time when you were baking it at home, and it was a one-man show. Here's where you have a mila, maybe baking. It was a one-man show. You were baking, you were kneading it. There's only so much one person could do. But if you're baking it in a bakery, and there's lots of Izrim, and there's tons of helpers, and there's a big staff, so then shir challah goes out the window. And this is how the Mishnah Berurah brings down that Lemaisa, he says, Be'ikr din ze b'yameinu, he says, L'daitem le'chashishu chacham b'zeh rak b'yameim she'adam ha'yalash v'irach. Chazal were only chayshish for this amount when a person himself was kneading and doing it in his house. But and because a person can only do so much, he says, they didn't have yet this innovation, this press that we use to knead it. It would sit around for a long time. Their ovens were small. You couldn't get 100 matzahs into the oven at one shot. So, Mela, because of the slowing of the process and because it wasn't so simple, so there was a gzeira. Chazal said, you can't bake anything bigger than that size. Bismanei knew that it's a bakery. You have a cooler. That you could bake even bigger sized doughs because we're able to handle them better and we could think. Now, for example, the sheer mill, let's say. The din, everybody's familiar that matzah becomes chametz in 18 minutes. That's a Gemara. The Gemara says that as a standard, matzah is in 18 minutes. It says in the Gemara, if it's too hot or too cold, or the water's too hot or too cold, or the batch is too big or too small, then that's out the window. So meaning there's so many variables and so many chumras in Shehiyah that Chazal, it's Gemara after Gemara after Gemara that Chazal are busy with. The main weak point, the main point that needs shmira by matzah is that it shouldn't be shaya and become chametz. You shouldn't leave it untouched and it become chametz. And every variable that's different than from exactly the way Chazal prescribed, we say all bets are off. We don't know. And each one of these gemaras is something that becomes relevant that poskim shtolzu later on in the fight about machine matzah. Additionally, one more important nakuda is that there's a big machlekes poskim. If the din is that you have to have 18 minutes of sitting untouched for it to be chametz. Me'ikar din, if the matzah sits for 18 minutes untouched, it's chametz. But if it sits for 17 minutes and 30 seconds, it's not chametz. Now, what's the halacha? If you knead it, then you let it sit for 5 minutes. You roll it out, you let it sit for 5 minutes, and then you put it in the oven. So do we say that the shehiyah is mitzarf zelazeh? That the different weightings that you're doing at different tkufas, it adds up. And in the event, it would be 18 minutes or not. Now, me'ikar din, we paskin that a shehiyah that is followed by a proper avodah of the dough. Meaning, if you're shayah for 17 minutes, and then you really knead that dough out again for real, a real kneading it out, not just touching it. You knead it out properly, so says the Trumas Hadeshen, the shehiyah is batal. The clock restarts. You have another 18 minutes. You can put it down and wait another 18 minutes before it will become chametz. Now, say the poskim, that's all good, no variables. If you have controlled temperature and controlled size, but if you have any one of the variables off and things are not how they're supposed to be, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too warm, then maybe it becomes chametz right away. Just like we find, there's a rush that says that if you're shaya the matzah at the mouth of the oven, if you leave the matzah too close to the oven, then the shehiyah is instant. Then it goes right away. We find another shita that says, but after you roll it out, after all that work is done to it, if you're shaya, it becomes chametz right away. So, I'm not trying to give a shlemistic overview of shehiyah and when it's us and when it's not us or hilchas shehiyah. I'm just trying to give a little bit of the pertinent background information that's going to become relevant in all the chuvas. Okay, that is hakdama number 2. Now, Hakdama number 3 is as follows. Let's do it this way. Hakdama number 3 is as follows. So, Hakdama number 3 is like this. So matzah bakeries we're seeing was an innovation on their own, meaning the way matzah was done, b'mei Chazal, when Klal Yisrael left the Midbar, all the way through the Zman HaGemara, was personal. In your home, matzah was baked by a staff of a husband and wife. Maybe if they had some children, they helped out. It was a small operation. Now there was a big innovation, b'mei Rishonim, matzah bakery. You could bake with helpers, you could bake much more, the whole town could bake at once. That's an innovation. That's innovation number 1. Now, at a certain point later on down the line, that innovation became a big chesaron. Because imagine a tiny matzah bakery from shtetl in Europe that had an oven inside of it that was boiling hot, and you had people of varying levels of frumkeit bustling around and doing this job and that job, and it was a tiny tzafuf room, and you'll read different dayanim from different kehilas in their Shabbos HaGadol drushes. It was like a favorite topic to hit. It was like that the matzah bakeries are totally out of whack. This is not good. And I read a few different dayanim in their drushes giving speeches, like describing the terrible situation. One guy says, I came into the room full of hustle and bustle and shmuzerai. You couldn't tell they were Isaac in a mitzvah at all. There's a boiling hot oven in the corner over there. It's barely comfortable to be there. The people are passing things around the table. Who even knows what they have in their pockets? I don't know if these people are from. Another one writes that he saw one of the workers on the rolling line take out a sandwich between shift to shift and eat a little bit. It was so frenetic and so busy that he couldn't have lunch. He took his lunch, he brought lunch to go, he took lunch out of his pocket, he ate it on the line. Says, I saw the guy eating a bagel while he's baking matzah, practically. And uchahena v'chahena. So this starts like in the 16 and 1700s and even the 1800s. You find Grace Rabbanim who are very, very bothered by the common practice of matzah bakeries and start critiquing it. Like, ad kedei kach, that the Baruch Tam, I think that's the Leipniker Rav, a Rav in Poland, writes, and he writes, he's before machine matzah, he dies in the early 1800s, he writes, Halavai, that it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, machines were coming out for everything, and the world was moving at a very quick pace. The Leipniker Rav writes, Halavai, that someone should invent a machine that could take out all these archi-parchi and people in the matzah bakery who are not behaving, and the machine could bake matzah for us. This is what the Leipniker Rav writes, the Baruch Tam writes. Now he never chalom that could actually be, and what would arise from that. But he writes that as like his wish list. Like, halavai, there could be such a machine that would bake us matzahs. So with that in mind, you have to realize that when the machine matzah innovation arose on the scene, there were many people who looked at it as a massive takana, a huge innovation. Like, Baruch Hashem, finally we could put away all the problematic issues with the matzah bakery, all the environment and all the shehiyas that are happening, and it's too hot, and it's not controlled, and it's not the way Chazal described, and the people aren't from, and they're bringing chametz on the floor. It was looked at as a huge innovation. Like, Baruch Hashem, we're finally out of that zone, and we could harness the Industrial Revolution to finally get matzahs the way we're supposed to have them, the way they're kosher, the way they're supposed to be. So many gedolim, many grace and mention looked at it that way, and they were excited. Not just like, it's like, hey, but the Evid, I'll give a hashd to this. There was an excitement. On the side that mattered matzah bakery, there was a tremendous excitement. Now, on the side that answered it, there was a tremendous chaymer to it also, as we'll see. So now let's just talk about how it came to be. So in about 1838, give or take, a French Jew by the name of Isaac Singer invents the first machine matzah. Now, just keep in mind, it's not a machine matzah that you put the ingredients on one side and baked matzahs come out on the other side. All it is a hand roller attached to several rolling pins, where you put the matzah through and it rolls it out into a flat sheet of dough. That's the entire thing. You put the matzah in, and instead of having to do all the hard, rolling it out, every person individual, and having 12 people, 20 people on a table rolling out matzahs, you roll it through. A couple he describes that you have to have 3 strong men standing at the wheel. They roll it through, and you have 2 men standing on the other side to gather it and make sure it stays on the table properly. And then you take like a big pizza cutter, like the ones you lean on like this, like a big pizza cutter, and you cut the matzahs and you have matzahs. Now, originally, when irony, the sewing machine, the mechanical sewing machine was also invented by Isaac Singer, not related to each other at all, and at the same tkufa. So, like, if you look for Isaac Singer, you're going to get a sewing machine. You have to look at Isaac Singer machine matzah to find the Isaac Singer who invented the machine matzah. Two French Jews or 2 Jews who invented two very popular mechanical innovations. B'chol, so Isaac Singer, when he invented this, so you turn it out and you get a big sheet of matzah. Now he was obviously aware, like we're aware, that matzahs are traditionally round and not square. And when you cut it with a pizza cutter, you're getting a bunch of square sheets. And he was aware of how odd that looked and that would probably raise some eyebrows. So he went to discuss it with the Rabbanim of his town. He lived in Alsace, which is like a border region between France and Germany. He went to the Beis Din of Paris to get a hechsher on his machine. He went to the Beis Din of Paris, and they suggested an idea that you could make a round cookie cutter. You'll cut out round circles on the sheet and gather up the remaining dough and feed it back in again. And you'll do it again. Now, this was to fix the problem of it looking odd and raising people's eyebrows. You'll do that. Now, we're going to see that ends up turning into a much bigger problem than the problem of raising people's eyebrows with the square matzah, which is why we know ultimately machine matzahs ended up being square. Square won the day for machine matzahs. Now, so Isaac Singer invents this. He goes to Paris and he gets a hechsher from the Beis Din of Paris. I think his name was Menachem Deutsch, I think is the Beis Din of Paris. He gets a hechsher, tuda he has, that's machshir's machine, says they watched it in action, they checked the temperature, they made sure they saw there's no chayrun was stuck in, like cracks and crevices for dough to get stuck in that could re-arise again, and the machine is a good innovation, and it's going to help people make matzah, b'chumrah, the proper way. He gets a hechsher, and then he moves on to Berlin to get another hechsher, and he goes to Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger. Keep in mind Ettlinger, because there's an Ettinger in the story also. He goes to Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, and he gets another hechsher from the Aruch LaNer, another famous Rav, whose Sfarim we still have today, who we learn, Grace Gadol. He gets a hechsher from Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, who says, yes, this is a positive innovation, this is a good thing, this is going to have better matzahs for everybody, and he gets a second hechsher from the Aruch LaNer. From there, in like the 1840s, it moves on, it starts spreading. And it goes to some rather famous towns with rather famous Rabbanim who give it a hechsher. For example, it goes to the town of Posen. Posen is Reb Kveger's town. Now, it makes it to the town of Posen later. It doesn't make it to the town where Reb Kveger's alive. At that time, Reb Shlomo Eger, Reb Kveger's son, had taken over the Steller. He was also old and ailing, but it comes to the town of Posen. It's brought to Reb Shlomo Eger's attention. Reb Shlomo Eger looks at it. Looks good. Looks like a very solid innovation, a nice milah to have in our matzah baking. It shows up at another famous town. It goes to Preshburg, the Chassam Sofer's town. Again, the Chassam Sofer is no longer alive. The Chassam Sofer is already dead. His son, the Ksav Sofer, another famous gadol, is the Rav of Preshburg at the time. He looks at it. He has a little bit more hesitation because he's part of the Chassam Sofer school of thought that new things are not always the best things. And he looks it over. He adds a list, and we have the list. It's about 5 pages long of like instructions and chumras that the people operating the machine should be makbid on. It's written in Yiddish Deutsch, which is like a combination of German and Yiddish. I cannot read it, but anyone who wants can try to read it. Where he adds like 5 pages of takanas and rules to the matzah baking with this machine. But again, he gives the hechsher. So now it's spread basically through France, through Germany, through Hungary. The machine became very, very popular over the 20 years and got hechsherim and haskamis from many, many great rabbanim. So where does the fight start? The fight starts when it arrives in Galicia. Now, Galicia in 1858 is part of it comes in 1858 to Galicia. Galicia at that time is part of the Austrian Empire still. And that's where the fight starts. So just to give a little background, I just want to... It comes to the town of Lvov, the town of Lemberg, which is the town where the Shalom Meshiv, Rabbi Yosef Shalom Natanzin, is the Rav. Now, I just want to give a drop of background on the town, and this will help us understand how the fight develops. The town of Lemberg is the biggest city in Galicia for the Jewish Kehillah. It has 50, 60,000 Jews there. It's a very, very big Kehillah of Jews there. The Rav in the early 1800s was a famous Rav, the Yeshuas Yaakov. We have his Shuvas, we have his Svarim. Yeshuas Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Orenstein was the Rav of Lvov. Now, in 1840, Rabbi Yaakov Orenstein, the Rav of Lvov, is Nifter. And at that time, the Reform and the Haskalah had made its way to Lvov, to Galicia, and they start campaigning that a Rav in town has to be a college graduate. And because of this campaign, the local government, the Austrian government in the city of Lvov, passes a rule that only a Rav who's a college graduate could be a Rav. And to accomplish that, they bring a Rav whose name is Abraham Cohn. Now, Abraham Cohn is a reformer, a proper reformer, a guy who possibly in his own life was not even Shemer Shabbos. He was a good speaker. He actually had smicha from Reb Shmuel Landa that I knew the son. So he didn't start off as a reformer. He started off as a regular guy. He got smicha in Prague. He takes a sharp left turn. Ad Kedei Kach that it seems in his personal life he was Mechal Shabbos. He petitioned the government that all the schools should have to learn German. He petitioned the government that Jews should have to wear clothing like everybody else. He was a real proper reformer. Now they brought him into the town of Lemberg to be the Rav, and it made a bahala, tremendous bahala. He was brought into the main shul in Lemberg originally, and it was a frum shul, a really, really frum shul, that had Ga'inim, Talmidei Chachamim who lived, who davened there, and it made a tremendous bahala. Eventually, his movement of Lemberg builds their own shul, and they build a temple. It's a reform temple in Lvov and Lemberg, and he becomes the Rav there. And he gives his sermons in German, and, reform b'mloi muvan hamila, everything that's negative. Now, he has a shocking and terrible end. In the late 1840s, a young man by the name of Avram Ber Pilpul walks into his house one day during lunch with a cigar in his mouth and tells the servant that he wants to light his cigar from the kitchen fire. She says, sure. He bends down to light his cigar from the fire, and with his other hand, he pours a vial of arsenic into the soup, and he walks out. The Ber family, the Cohn family sits down for lunch an hour later, and within a few minutes, the entire family is violently ill. They're violently ill. They're all in bed. They rush to get a doctor. The doctor can't figure out what it is right away. Eventually, the first one, so all five. He had five. Him, his wife, and 5 children. All 7 of them are violently ill in bed. Within 24 hours, Abraham Cohn is dead of arsenic poisoning. He dies of arsenic poisoning, and that's how they know it's arsenic, because they take his body and they test his blood, and they find high levels of arsenic in his stomach. His infant daughter, like a 6-month-old daughter, who obviously was given to taste from the soup also dies. His 4 children and his wife survive. Now, it becomes it's a huge thing. The police, they arrest Avram Ber Pilpul, obviously. They arrest the leaders of the community, one of the Yeshua Yaakov's grandsons, someone Borenstein, someone Orenstein, everyone gets arrested. The whole Kehillah, it's a huge mess in the Kehillah. Now, there's obviously, tremendous inaccuracies in the way the case is pursued. It's somewhat backwater. And these Gvirim, these Jewish Kehillah members, hire some good lawyers, and eventually they all get free. The reason we know so much about the story is because Mrs. Cohn, the almana of Avram Cohn, filed an appeal. Like, she sued the Austrian government because nobody got locked up for her husband's murder. And in it we have all the details of the case. So now he dies, he gets poisoned. Now, we don't know if this is something the Rabbanim were pro, against. We have no idea. This is what happens. Now, in light of that, Lemberg has no Rav for a few years, and then its first Orthodox Rav who's allowed to slip through and become the Rav after this terrible break in the Kehillah is the Sholem Meshiv. Rabbi Yosef Shalom Natanzin, a real future Gadol Hadar, becomes the Rav of Lemberg. Now, at the same time, they also appoint a second Rav for the temple, for the Reformed temple. That guy's name is Shimon Schwabacher. Now, Shimon Schwabacher is not nearly as fry as Avram Cohn. They learned their lesson that type of reform is not going to work, so they get a guy who's a borderline reformer. He's Batsim from, in his own life he's from, he has some ideas that are a little bit, out of the whack or whatever, but he's Batsim from. So Shimon Schwabacher and the Sholem Meshiv are appointed to be the Rabbanim of Lvov at the same time, and the Sholem Meshiv decides that instead of having a huge fight in Lemberg, where everyone's at each other's throats, he's going to try to work with Shimon Schwabacher, and hopefully the reform doesn't have to be so bad in Lemberg. Now this is I would say, the fatal error of Rabbi Yosef Shaul's position on Machine Matzoh, is that he did this together with Shimon Schwabacher. He took the reform rabbi together with him, and together they looked at the Shaila, and together they paskin, and together they put out tshuvas on the matter, and because of that, the whole thing was looked at extremely suspect, meaning even extra, even people who would maybe be okay with innovation or whatever, looked at it with extreme suspicion, and it brought out everybody, it inflamed everybody's passions on a much higher level. So now let's try to start to get to the Shaila a little bit. We actually need one more Hakdama. I guess this is the week for Hakdamas. We're doing Hakdamas the Chuvas themselves we'll have to read next week. This is the week for Hakdamas. There's one more Hakdama, one more very, very important point in this fight that becomes a big flashpoint. Is the Shalom Meshiv, the Rav of Lemberg, who we're talking about over there, is a famous genius. He's a genius for all time. I mean, if you take this from today, you'll still be blown away by his genius. The Shalom Meshiv is a famous genius. He had a chavrusa who he learned with for over 20 years. His name was Matzoh Ettinger, not Ettinger, from Germany, from Berlin, who gave a Hechshonet. Ettinger is his brother-in-law. The Shalom Meshiv moves to Lvov to marry Rav Matzoh Ettinger's sister. And he moves into the house by the Ettingers, and they become chavrusas. Rav Matzoh is 3 or 4 years older than the Shalom Meshiv, and they become inseparable chavrusas. They learn for 20 years together. And uniquely, and this you don't find by too many other machabrim, they publish many, many svarim together. And not stam like the svarim that nobody reads. They publish, for starters, first of all, on a Bavli we know, there's Meseres Hashas, right? It says every time a Gemara is there, where else you can find the Gemara, every time there's a din that's Kepaskins, where you can find the Shulchan Aruch. On the Yerushalmi, up until the Shalom Meshiv and Matzoh Ettinger, there was no such thing. Them two together, as they learned Yerushalmi, filled in these blanks and wrote it in together. Just an idea. This is like a Rav Chaim Kanievsky type of work. They did this together as they learned the Sugya. Another sefer they put out is a sefer called Magin Gibayrim. It's a sefer that goes through the whole Orach Chaim, all the halachas of Orach Chaim. It's quoted, just to give you an idea of how important it is, it's quoted in the Mishnah Berurah almost 300 times. And the Mishnah Berurah doesn't quote contemporaries. The Kamat doesn't quote people who live Be'erach in this Tkufa. This sefer, of people who lived Be'erach in this Tkufa, he quotes almost 300 times. So they wrote off the charts, amazing svarim together. For example, they wrote a sefer on Treifus. They have 3 askamas on it. The 3 askamas are the Nesivis, Reb Kiveger, Chum Sefer. They are held in the highest regard. They're putting out svarim that are high quality. 2 young geniuses living in Lvov, learning together, and working through many, many sugyas together. Now, eventually, the break that happens between them is that Rav Matzoh Ettinger is on the tzad that holds that Mashin Matzah is aser, and the Shalom Meshiv is the main Rav who holds Mashin Matzah is mutter. And because of that, it's extremely personal and it's extremely close to home. And the chuvas that the Shalom Meshiv writes about his brother-in-law are very, very harsh. Some of his harshest words are saved for his brother-in-law. And that's like an important wrinkle in the story because it plays a big role in the whole tone of the story. The fact that they were brother-in-laws, they were chavrusas, and they were close, and all that. Now, so to the shaila itself. Really the way to frame the shaila is Mashin Matzah, the way we described it, is a simple innovation that you turn it, it spits it out. Now here's the shailas that could arise. And I'm not going to get into them in detail, we'll have to save that, but let's just lay the groundwork. The shailas that could arise is Aleph, there's a din that for the matzah that's needed for the Leil HaSeder, it needs to be Lishma. Could a machine constitute Lishma or not? Could, turning a wheel, not actually physically doing it with your own hands, constitute Lishma, and that's a sugya that we'll get to. The other one is putting the scraps back in, problem. Another shaila is going to be, does it get too hot? Is the environment not controlled? Another shaila is going to be, is round and square itself a problem? There's many, many more that come up. We'll try to go through some of them. I'll just say, I'm not going to do this week, but the Shalom Meshiv and the Shlomo Kluger, their chuvas read like a novel. These chuvas are like off the charts, except the intensity and how personal it is, and you see their feelings, their emotions in them. They're amazing, amazing chuvas, and I want to go through them and highlight all the main points. But this is the Hakdam week. We'll have to continue. Now, just the Rav asked me to announce that next week the shir is going to be folded into like a community breakfast for Mois Chitim and for the Kupa for the community like we did last year. So I think the shir will be somewhat shorter and in a different format. So I think I won't continue this. I'll do something different, and then the next week when we have more time, I'll finish this and we'll read all the chuvas.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.